Good morning, everyone. I'm that dude over there, and last year I watched Helluva Boss for the first time, and I really enjoyed it. Sure, they curse too much, and there are some opinions I had that I don't completely agree with anymore, but for the most part, I actually really like the story they were telling. However, that being said, I think Season 2's finale left me feeling a bit mixed. I could see what they were trying to do, but I feel like the execution was a bit messy, to say the least. So today I want to pitch a version that keeps the spirit of what they wanted to do while improving where I think it failed. I want to remind everyone beforehand that I'm no writer. I'm just a jackass on the internet who likes to share his opinions. So if you want to disagree or discuss, I'm happy to do so in the comments below. And at the end of the day, this is just a critique of what I saw. So unless I thought something was incredibly stupid, I'm not going to tear into anything too harshly. So first off, it's important to identify what exactly happens across the episodes to understand what the writers wanted to do. And from my understanding of episodes 11 and 12, this is what I was able to uncover. They wanted to bring the contract to light between Blitz and Stolas, and through Stella, her brother, not looking up his name, uses the contract to punish Stolas and steal his fortunes. This all goes according to plan, and Stolas makes a choice to save Blitz. This choice cuts off Stolas from Octavia, and shows Stolas still cares on some level for Blitz. In return for this, Blitz finally understands Stolas' feelings for him, and begins to open up. The following episode shows the collapse of Octavia and Stolas' relationship, parts of it from Stella's abusive parenting, and parts of it from Stolas' choices. Meanwhile, Stolas learns to adapt to lower demon life, and spends time with Blitz, getting to know him more personally. By the end of the episode, Stolas seeks Octavia after 3 weeks of silence, only to be blocked by Stella's brother. After a fight that requires Octavia's help, the imps win. However, Octavia leaves her dad behind, believing he doesn't love her. From this bare-bones summary, we can see that Viv wanted to create a scenario that developed the Stolas ship while also giving consequences for the ship to continue. However, it's when we get to the details that everything starts to get a bit weird. As someone who loves courtroom dramas and whodunits, I think the trial was greatly skipped over. Using the Helluverse hierarchy chart, you can make the argument that because Hell, and the fact that it's an imp creating the problem, that the sins would go straight to punishment and not care. However, I think differently. Remember, Stella's brother is framing this as an attack from the imps to an Ars Goetia. If anything, I would see this as the sins being furious for someone attempting to destroy the society Hell is based on. If an imp can cause this much damage to someone higher up, then what's stopping another imp from doing the same? And while I do think some would want immediate punishment, maybe Belphegor and Mammon, I also think that the weight of Asmodeus and Beelzebub would encourage a fair trial. I also think that if we want to play with Satan in a creative way, the reason why he's the judge is because wrath is deserved by the one in the wrong. Doesn't matter if it's the prosecutor or the defense. So Satan is impartial as he gets to do his job regardless of the outcome. I think this trial would have been a great centerpiece for season 3, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I think the way Stella's brother, still not looking up his name, finds out the critical info to start the case is also really dumb, and its plan altogether is so much worse. Manga Kamen does a really good job breaking down the flaws with his plan, so I don't want to tackle that. But I feel like there are better ways of her brother to get this info without making Stella seem more of an idiot than she really is. But my biggest issue with the finale is ultimately Octavia's choice. Listen, I understand her perspective on this. Her dad lied and quite literally proved that he would choose Blitz over her. I get her wanting to cut him from her life. But on the contrary, why the hell would she stay with Stella? Stella is actively worse and prevents her from contacting Stolas in any regard. And again, she has the right to be mad at Stolas, but when someone spends 3 months or weeks or whatever trying to get a hold of you to explain something, it shows that there's more going on beneath the surface, at least in my opinion. And the fact that Stella is actively mocking him and preventing Octavia from contacting him, I just wonder why Octavia doesn't just run away. Octavia, like the audience, has been given no reason for why she should stay with Stella. And in my opinion, I would rather go live with Dad and try and figure this out than be ignored and have him be insulted in front of me. I don't know, I could talk a lot about my thoughts on that, but let's try and reel it back for a moment. For me, the three biggest problems I want to fix are simple: the trial, Octavia's relationship collapse, and the trial coming to be. Starting in order, I think the beginning of episode 11 starts strong with Stella and her brother. However, I would have liked it more if they didn't just rush into things. Let her brother learn more and ask questions about the imp, not so much because he cares about the imp, but because he wants to hear how the imp is connected to Stolas. Stella can be her cruel self and mock Stolas about teaching an imp to read, classism, and explain to her brother that Stolas invites the imp over for nights and finds the imp leaving with a book in the morning. Her brother wonders why and asks the significance of the book, to which Stella drops that Stolas talked about it before, but, she never really cared. Again, it's an important object to Stolas, so it really doesn't mean anything to her. However, let her brother put it together that this is the book entrusted to Stolas. His plan can still be the same. However, he works with Stella to ensure that Stolas actually watches the trial and helps actually get things going. If we're trying to build up her brother as a calculating threat, I think this is the best way to do so. As for Stella, we already know it's in character for her to hate Stolas, but I don't want her to be so idiotic that she holds vital information to his downfall for no apparent reason. I think she wouldn't put stock into the meetings for the book because she doesn't care about Stolas enough to know the value of said book, something her brother would know since he's trying to get rid of Stolas. As for the purpose of the trial, I would paint it as a doomed if he jumps in, doomed if he doesn't. If Stolas doesn't jump in to save Blitz, we of course know Blitz would die, but Stolas would be stripped of his titles regardless since he could no longer be trusted to hold his position. And again, if Stolas does step in, it paints Stolas in a bad light for admitting the truth in her brother's claims, stripping him of his titles again, and so on and so forth. But now that we're actually talking about the trial, let's start with the trial aspect of it. I like that Satan is a pseudo-judge in place for Lucifer, with the other sins playing more jury. I think Stella's brother playing prosecution is fine, but if we're including the Spanish bird, I think he would play reluctant defense. Reluctant because Stella's brother holds more weight than anyone in IMP, and he actually cares for Stolas' feelings. We can still have the courtroom be corrupt with Stryker and Stella's brother twisting the narrative, but we can also have positive support with B and Oz coming to be character witnesses. But I think that Satan would side with Stella's brother because Stella's brother grills into B and Oz. Remember, when B met Blitz, he proceeded to get drunk and give her bad vibes. And with Oz, Blitz never met him long enough to have a good idea of his character, having to rely on his relationship with another imp. Again, something that can be spun against him. We could also use Mammon and the clown arc as something to discredit Ozzy. All of this coming to a climax where Stella gets Stolas to see the moment when Blitz is about to be wrongly judged. Stolas appears like he did in the show, but I have one major change that I think would piss off some Helluverse fans. Cut the song. I don't care. The song, story-wise, sucks. First off, Stolas admitting to the crime would cause more confusion. From any way you look at it, it would raise suspicion that Stolas would rat himself out for no good reason. I think the setup is fine, but I feel like there are better ways to execute this without having Stolas admit to being the true culprit. Instead, I would paint it like this. Stolas comes down to clear the air, admitting to lending the book out, but explaining that there are bigger problems at hand. Using the fact that he'd been kidnapped in front of Stella and her brother, and nearly dying to the hands of an imp, I believe Stolas would paint the narrative that there's a secret mastermind causing all of this. When Satan would bring up the relevance of this, Stolas explains that he believes the mastermind's true purpose is to kill the lords of hell with imported angelic weapons, and that the culprit is someone among the higher class. We all know it's Andraelphus? Fuck, I looked up his name. Whatever, we all know it's Andy over here, but the higher ups don't know this. Satan comes to the conclusion that while this is something to look into, Stolas did break the laws of demonkind and deserves to be punished. And for Octavia, who's been watching this the whole time, I think here is where Stella would turn off the TV, basically playing the wholesome mom and saying, I don't want my daughter to see her father be painted like this. Not because she actually means it, but to score brownie points from Octavia's perspective. Remember, Stella hates Stolas, and for good reason too. But Stella and Octavia have no set dynamic. If we want Stella to hold Octavia in her grip, we need to lay the foundations of her emotionally manipulating her to her side. Meanwhile, back in the court, Stolas is stripped of his titles and loses his abilities. However, Andy doesn't get them. Since the threat of someone more sinister is at play, Satan decides to hold another trial in the future. Basically, double or nothing it. If there is someone more sinister at play, and it's brought to light, Stolas will have his status returned. However, if not, then Stolas will be punished further, along with the imps for wasting the times of the higher-ups and stirring drama in hell. This puts our protagonist and antagonist against each other directly. Andy has to cover his tracks and falsify evidence, while Stolas has to collect evidence with all of his connections to get everyone free. And if we still keep the Spanish bird, his name is Visago, by the way, I believe he would be inclined to help, along with Oz, B, and maybe any good relationship he still has with the higher-ups. IMP could also get involved, putting their individual skills and time as assassins to use finding clues and getting information. I also think the outcome of the trial would also change how people are looked at. It doesn't make any sense for Stolas to be rejected by imps when he intentionally stood up for one. While I don't think he would be Blitzo levels of popularity afterwards, he'd still be looked at in a positive light. But how does this affect Stolas? I think this still drags Stolas down to be more on Blitz's level, and raises Blitz enough to bring them to see eye to eye. No power imbalance, as they can finally see each other at eye level. I think Stolas would step in because of lingering feelings and hire IMP to help, thus giving a reason for the two to interact with each other. But I hear you saying, but wasn't the whole point of Stolas sacrificing himself at the trial to drive the final wedge between him and Octavia? Remember, this broke their promise, as it literally showed that Stolas would rather be with Blitz than Octavia. However, I think this change would also address his point as well. We already know from prior episodes that when Stolas is committed to something, he can get a bit tunnel visioned and focus on what's right in front of him. You know, think back to Season 2, Episode 2. I think that Stolas would be so focused on this trial that he wouldn't think about how Octavia would be feeling in the present, letting Octavia fall further into her mother's hands and fall further into Stella's manipulation. Of course, that would require that we take Stella seriously for a moment and stop doing shit like this.
Hilarious! 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 Hilarious!
As we move into episode 12, we can get this same opening, but with a twist. We see Stolas' perspective as he wants to clear his name for the sake of his daughter. He wants to be back in her life, but can't because of Stella's inherent status, and probably some court order or something. Maybe we throw in a line where Stolas explains that he would do anything for Octavia, which would hit a chord for Blitz and his relationship with Luna, thus making Blitz want to work with Stolas even more to give him his family back. Meanwhile, we cut to Octavia's perspective, and I would argue that Octavia would want to leave. Up till this point, we don't know her thoughts on Stella well enough to gauge their relationship. We could say that Octavia blames Stolas for Stella's change, but we could also say that Octavia was ignorant of the situation until Stella actively displayed worse behavior. Honestly, there's no real evidence to point either way. So my argument is that Octavia is lost with no one to trust. She can't trust her dad and feels frigid in her home, so she decides to run away. However, before she succeeds, she is stopped by Stella. The two would get into an argument where Stella would proclaim that, she loves her, and that Stolas is the cause of all of this. Stella is the only person that Octavia can trust, and if she doesn't believe her, to look around and see for herself. See the truth with her own eyes, prompting Octavia to stay, if only to try and understand Stella's perspective. We can keep the montage, however, I would change some things around here as well. 1. Stolas and IMP are trying their best to look for clues. Thus, Stolas is too busy to be constantly trying to reach out to Octavia. 2nd, I would give another montage to intermingle with this one, where we would see Octavia contemplating the seed of doubt planted by Stella, using prior episodes to add to the weight of her decision. And finally, the montage would end with Octavia finding the room with all of her old stuff. As for Octavia's song, I would save it for after she finds the happy pills in there. The pills being the straw that breaks the camel's back. The thing that pushes her to believe that Stolas never actually cared about her, and pushes her ultimately into Stella's arms. That's where I would put the scene of Octavia being comforted by Stella. IMP going on their mission could still be kept in. Basically, we still need money, so we're gonna do a job real quick and be right back. You know, that kind of thing. Stolas would still go after Octavia by this point, not because of depression or whatnot, you know, him crying and throwing a fit on the floor, but because he feels useless for failing to find any worthwhile evidence. He decides, fuck the court order, fuck Stella, I need to see Octavia. I need to see my daughter. Blitz, meanwhile, would harden his resolve from the job. You know, the one where we see the gay dads and their daughters. And thus, cement or further cement his desire to help Stolas see his family be put together. You know, hoping that if he finally does something for someone else, he could begin laying down the foundation to start building a bridge back to Stolas. Upon returning from the job, the imps notice that Stolas is gone and immediately begin looking for Stolas, if only to prevent him from doing anything reckless or prevent another assassination attempt. We could still have Andy be waiting there for Stolas as a literal and figurative wall to stop him from seeing Octavia, and you know, the fight breaks out as intended. And instead of Octavia using her abilities to save everyone, I think Octavia would use her words to stop Andy, reminding Andy that all of this is pointless and wouldn't solve anything. So, you know, the scene would carry on. Stolas would try to thank Octavia for saving him, but Octavia keeps her cold front. The confrontation occurring and Octavia cutting off Stolas. And from here, the season ends similarly, with the exception that the dance at the end is cut for the two overlooking the city, each reflecting and hoping for a better tomorrow. With this, I think it gives two important events to look after for the next season. Not only Stolas trying to find his way back to Octavia, but the confrontations with Andy and the upcoming trial day. And with Millie getting Gregornant at the end of season 2, we can explore the idea of family in season 3, and what it means for each of the characters. Stolas on his quest to reunite his family and the sacrifices he makes in that pursuit. Blitz on what it means to be a family and evolving his love for the people in his life. You know, making his connections with Luna and Stolas a bit more fleshed out rather than, you know, how he usually treats Luna or Stolas. Millie, in a direct sense, as she's left to wonder if she should have a family with Moxie and what it would mean for their child. Seeing as they have to grow up with a family that doesn't entirely respect Moxie, and a family that isn't the greatest as they murdered Moxie's mom. I think it would be exciting, and I would love to see what would come from this. But I also fully understand that this isn't completely thought through and still has a lot of holes to be patched out. I understand that my idea might sound worse for the show or has the potential to completely forget what the show was marketed on. I don't know, man. I just love Helluva Boss, despite its flaws, and believe that it could be better if they really sit down and put their minds to it. But that's enough of me rambling. I'm just one guy after all, and I don't know this world as well as the creator does. So leave me a comment below about how garbage my idea is, and let's have a discussion in the comments below. I would love to workshop ideas with you guys and hear your opinions. And while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe, as it helps idiots like me who suck at promoting videos. And until next time, stay safe out there.